Konnichiwa! Say, Jeff Diamond des Yoshi arimasu. Sao doesn't a at Toyota Ju Vonda Sumo Wrestlers. Say, Rikshi, Sumo Rikshi, Daleata. Eta. Yeah, you can tell my Japanese sucks, but I tried my best. Nevertheless, we're talking about a Japanese sport which I've been following for years and years and years and years. It all started in 1995, 30 decades ago, while we were learning cultures in a culture unit in Mrs. Gillespie's fourth grade class. And we were talking about Japan and sumo wrestling and all that. And then, well, that was the year that the Kobe earthquake hit. So anyway, yeah, I was fascinated by sumo and would make a lot of sumo references and stuff throughout public school and high school and all that. It kind of grew a little bit um, in my Kitchener era, but no. So that's, I'm an avid follower of sumo too. Like I keep looking and seeing if there's some great Rikishi or sumo wrestlers that are fantastic. So I come up with the top 10 sumo wrestlers of all time. Of course, there's one little exemption. One, number 10 is not a Yokozuna or a grand champion. If you get the rank of Yokozuna in sumo, you can't be demoted because there's a system. You get the top division with Magashira with normal fights, and if you do well, you go to Sanyaku, which is the top three ranks. You can either be a Komusubi, a Sekiwake. Well, Komusubi turns into Sekiwake, which turns to Oseki, your champion, but then you can turn to Yokozuna Grand Champion. To be Yokozuna, you have to win back-to-back titles as an Oseki, or as a champion, if you will. But there's some special exemptions sometimes too. But yeah, these 10 Rikishi, all but one, have done their job. Anyway, number 10 on the list is my boy, Konishiki Ka. Konishiki Yakuyoshi, the first non-Japanese wrestler to beat Oseki. He came from Hawaii. He was under the tutelage of Takamiyama, or Jesse as they call him, who was the first foreigner to win a sumo yusho, or a tournament, back in 1972, before Mongolia took over. Anyway, Konishiki was a legend and all that. At one time, at 600 pounds, he was the heaviest sumo wrestler to ever compete. A Russian sumotori beat him. But anyway, Konishiki was big and all that. He was like 400 pounds on his debut in 1982. He was quick and all that for a big guy, and his supari slapping techniques was huge because, with all that weight behind his slaps, you could be concussed or something like that. Probably not. But anyway, Konishiki showed balance in the 80s and 90s. In the 80s, he was decent. In 1989, he shocked everyone by winning a tournament in the era of one of the other sumo wrestlers I will talk about. But anyway, Konishiki Ka was a pretty good wrestler and all that. In 1987, he was promoted to Oseki, which is the second highest rank in sumo, becoming the first foreigner to do so. And then 89, he won a tournament. He won two tournaments in 1992, and everyone thought he was going to be Yokozuna, but he did not win them back-to-back. Worst part was that Konishiki was basically biased against because of the Yokozuna council saying he can't be Yokozuna because he's a foreigner. It didn't help matters that some junior wrestler impersonating Konishiki made the statements that Konishiki would be, if he was Japanese, he'd be Yokozuna. Unfortunately, that ruined his goodwill in a sense, even though he didn't make the comments. He faltered. He dropped from Oseki in 1993. He put on a little weight. He had knee problems. And by 1997, he was out of sumo wrestling. But he was still an icon. Number 9 on the list is Kisano Sato, who's a modern icon. He has the story of perseverance. I know that a lot of other wrestlers have had perseverance. But Japan was in a bit of a sumo depression, if you will. For 2 decades, there were no Yokozuna Grand Champions that were Japanese. They were mostly Mongolian. And the fact of the matter is, Kisano Sato was the great Japanese hope, if you will. A pair of Yusho or titles, and he got to be Yokozuna. He had massive injury problems, but he was still Yokozuna, and it restored Japanese pride in sumo. Unfortunately for him, his injuries just kept bugging him and he only competed in like what 3 or 4 tournaments as a yokozuna before having to retire. But Japanese sumo is big. We have the sumo wrestler named Ano Sato, who's actually making waves. Ano Sato actually came into sumo, but he competed in the amateur sumo thing at the World Games. When the World Games is the biggest sports festival not named the Olympics, but World Games you have like events that are not Olympic based, and of course sumo wrestling was one of them. Unfortunately, because of Egypt's performance and unsportsmanship in 2022 at the World Games, which were in Birmingham, Alabama, they had to ban sumo from this year's event in Korea. Nevertheless, Ano Sato should bring some good luck. Anyway, number 8 is a yokozuna who died recently, last year. His name was Akebono Taro. Well, that was his Japanese name. His English name was Chad Rowan, who became the first foreign-born yokozuna and the first yokozuna of Irish descent. Akebono came from Hawaii like Konishiki. He was decent. You gotta watch the YouTube video. Like this series called Challenge, and then Akebono was in it, and he challenged himself to talk to people about his courageous rise to sumo greatness. But yeah, Akebono was 6'5", and it was like, well, 6'8". Sorry, he was more than 2 meters tall and weighed over 200 kilograms. Well, obviously you're 6'8", but yeah, he was big. And sometimes in sumo wrestling, being tall does not make sense because your center of gravity is not that best. But Akebono persevered and basically was in that massive 90s rivalry with Takanohana and Wakanohana. And that brought sumo back to the main stage. He won 11 titles, the last in 2000. He had sheer strength, size strength, and he had poise. That's kind of why the Yokozuna Council made him Yokozuna in 1993. After all, Akebono did win back-to-back titles as a Oseki. And number 7 is a 1930s icon by the name of Futabayama. Futabayama is a pretty good wrestler, too. He had a 69-match winning streak, which is amazing. But here's the thing. Nowadays, you have 6 tournaments a year for 15 tournaments and for 15 matches. But back in the 30s and 40s, they had like 3 or even 4 tournaments were the highest amount, and there weren't like 15-day events. There were like 12 or 13 matches. So 69 matches, like nowadays, you would have to have the equivalent of winning 4 straight tournaments without dropping one and then picking up 9 extra wins. That's how hard it is. I mean, well, of course, you can technically win 3 tournaments perfect and have some leftover stuff. But anyway, he won 12 tournaments before the 6 tournaments a year. Imagine his stuff if the 6 tournament a year philosophy was in the 30s and 40s. I think he probably would have won up to 19 tournaments. He dominated the 30s and 40s. He had a few physical ailments, but he still did it. His intensity, his technical prowess. His 69-match winning streak was actually snapped in controversial fashion because his opponent allegedly stepped out before Futabayama fell. And if that was true, then Futabayama would have won. They do have the whole mono-e like discussion, but they don't have video replay. They don't do that nowadays. Yeah, Futabayama was huge in all of that. He was basically the essential Rikishi before a star in the 60s was born. Number 6 is Takanohana. Speaking of, Akebono, but Takanohana was the big rival to one Akebono. And of course, he had his older brother is Wakanohana. Strange how the younger brother beats the older brother in sumo. Well, he won 22 titles, which is pretty impressive. He had a classic stoic sumo-style family legacy because his dad was a oseki. I don't think his dad was a yokozuna. His uncle was a yokozuna. But anyway, yeah, Takanohana has been a name that was used for many years. But yeah, Takanohana. Sumo was popular in modern times with Akebono, Wakanohana, and a few other people like Kaiho and Musashi Maru who did not make this list. But what's more important was Takanohana in 2002, was it? he was down and out. He was hurt a lot, and people thought he was going to retire. And then he built himself back, and then he won a title. It was so inspiring. The Prime Minister of Japan even was there to present him with the Emperor's Cup. You know, the trophy they get every time. But anyway, his classic Stoic style looked good. And let's not forget that Takano Hana actually broke many age records, such as being the youngest ever to win a top division title at 19 years old. You barely get into hockey. You barely get into baseball. You barely get into basketball anymore, or even pro football at 19 years old. Pro football, you got to last like 3 years to be. You're 21 years old. Basketball, you can only have 1 year of college. You can get in at 19 or 20 years old. Hockey, you can get in at 18 and 19. And baseball, it'll be hard to get in at 19. You're not Juan Soto or Bryce Harper. But yeah, Takano Hana was an essential rikishi. Number 5 is Asashoryu, as in one of the great Mongolian wrestlers of all time. He had ferocity, innovation, and he dominated the early 2000s, known for his athleticism, charisma, and controversial flair. He won 25 titles, which was pretty impressive, and was the first Mongolian-born Yokozuna. Asashoryu is proving that Mongolian sumo was huge. And yes, Mongolia practices sumo, which is a lot different. Normally, it's in Mongolian sumo, you have to grasp onto people's arms and all that and try to flip them down. It's no like Supari style, like my man Akibono. But anyway, Asashoryu did his job, winning 25 titles, first Mongolian-born Yokozuna. Unfortunately for Asashoryu, a couple of controversies with his junior wrestlers, if you will, because in sumo stables, there's a hierarchy and all that. The junior wrestlers basically have to get up before the older wrestlers and basically do everything for their senpai or seniors and the stable master or the oyakata. So yeah, something with his junior wrestlers and making assaulting them, I don't know, but yeah, there was a lot of problems. But yeah, Asashoryu got booted out at the worst possible time. It's like Haruma Fuji. He also got out of sumo in the worst possible way too. Anyway, number 4 is Kitanomi. Kitanomi was a iconic wrestler in the late 70s, early 80s. He was chairman of the Japan Sumo Association as well as Takano Hana. Down to force in the 70s and 80s. You could also say Wajima too in the 70s because he had that golden mawashi or golden belt. But nevertheless, Kitanomi was actually the youngest Yokozuna at 21 years old. He was even younger than Takano Hana, even though Takano Hana had many records, including making the Juryo division before he was 18. He had a stoic demeanor and overwhelming strength, 24 titles, 54 consecutive titles, tournaments as Yokozuna. To put that bluntly, he was a Yokozuna for 9 straight years. Most sumo wrestlers have 3 or 4 good years and then they falter. But this guy was Yokozuna for 9 consecutive years. That's amazing. Well, that 9 years ago was 2016, and that's when I started getting back into sumo wrestling. That's how it is. But yeah, he was a good wrestler too. And he had that famous match in 1981 in which was it him or was it someone else? But in 1981, that basically ruined it. And the guy who fought him in that famous 1981 match that saw half the Japanese TV audience watch is number 3, Chiyono Fuji, nicknamed the Wolf, known for his chiseled physique and technical mastery. The fact of the matter is that sumo wrestlers, everyone has that one thing that says Chiyono Fuji, that sumo wrestlers are big and plump and are not very agile. Well, screw you. If you watch videos online on YouTube, sumo wrestlers have to do the splits. That's not easy to do even if you're a freaking human. A normal human. But anyway, yeah, Chiyono Fuji was the Wolf, his chiseled physique. He, in fact, was one of the first wrestlers and one of the first Yokozuna to actually put more emphasis on his technique through sports science rather than just pure strength. He changed the notion that only the heaviest men could dominate sumo. Relying on speed, technique, and determination, winning 31 titles, which was amazing, and all that. And, he was fantastic in the 1980s. He had his rivalry with Konishiki. He had a rivalry with Okinumi. Onumi. I think it was Onumi. Yeah, no, it's a panda. But yeah, Chiyono was huge. That fight in 1981, half the Japanese population saw that fight. And it made Chiyono into a superstar. 31 titles longevity, he competed at the highest level in his mid-30s. Most Yokozuna can't do that. Chiyono would retire after losing to Takano Hana in 1990. And for a couple of years, they couldn't find a Yokozuna prospect. But yeah, Chiyono was just imaginable. Number 2 is Taiho. Taiho is a legend of the post-war era in which Japan was trying to prove to the rest of the world that they weren't all Emperor Hirohito style. Taiho was big in the 1960s. You didn't find any superstars in the 40s and 50s, but Taiho made things happen. He was 21 years old when he was promoted to Yokozuna, which is amazing. He had elegance, size, and skill, and a symbol for hope and discipline for a generation of Japanese. And it also helped that in 1964, Tokyo's Olympics were spectacular in the fact that it made Japan seem less evil. But Taiho was just an amazing Yokozuna and all of that. He had a 45 match winning streak back in 69-70, which was one of the best ever. And all of that. So Taiho knew how to win his fights and all of that. He won 32 championships, which was the most at one time. And everyone thought 32 will never be broken. And all that. Taiho just knew it. But unfortunately, it did. And by one man. His name is Hakuho. Hakuho. Born in Mongolia, the greatest sumo wrestler of all time. Mostly because of all the records he has. He's won 1,187 career wins, which with 1,093 in the Makuuchi division, because Makuuchi's the top division. The second division is Juryo, and then you go down to lower ranked things. But yeah, he proved amazing. 1,187 career wins. If you have 10 wins every tournament, that's 119 tournaments. That's equivalent to 20 years of that. So for that to happen, you have to win 10 fights every basho on average for 20 years. Because 6 tournaments a year. Imagine that, eh? No, that can't be right. Well, if you win 60 fights, you win 45. That's amazing. That's a 75% thing. 45 fights a year. Yeah, it would be like more than 20 years. You would have to win like 50. You would have to win 60. What am I talking about? Anyway, yeah, he had technical brilliance, agility, power, and a competitive spirit. He revitalized sumo in the 21st century. He brought sumo more international and all that, and a standard of excellence that redefined the sport. But the big thing about Hakuho is how many freaking titles he has. Taiho had 32, Chiyono 31, which is great and all that. It's like, okay, you won 30 tournaments. You're great. But the dude hit 45. 4-5. Hakuho won 45 top division championships. That's put in perspective. There's 6 tournaments a year for every other month. If you win every tournament for years and years, you have to do that for 7.5 years. You rarely see a Yokozuna, or any sumo for that matter, put up 5 or even 4 championships a year. Like if you're a great sumo, you win 4 titles a year. You would have to win 4 titles a year for an average of 11 years. That's right. You would have to win 4 tournaments every year for 11 years, and you'd be one short of Hakuho. And most Yokozuna don't have a life expectancy, as a sumo life expectancy at that, more than 7 years. That's how big Hakuho's record is. If you win half the tournaments a year, you have to do that for 15 years and all that. Hakuho also had a 60 plus match winning streak too, if you must know. But yeah, Hakuho just played with the big boys. And he retired just a few years ago. So, like, he's the GOAT. No one can deny that. I bet you Chinofuji would have been the GOAT. Or even Taiho, but no, it's Hakuho. Although you can say Chinofuji is the best Japanese sumo wrestler of all time, and Japan does have sumo wrestling as a sport. Canada doesn't. We had a prospect by the name of Brody Henderson who won the 2014 U.S. Open sumo thing. He went to Japan, but unfortunately his size kind of got to him, and he just left after a year and a half. You know the WWE wrestler Earthquake? That was John Tenta. He was a legit sumo wrestler in Japan and did quite well, but homesickness and, the Japanese culture just didn't get to him. And worst of all, he had to cover up his tiger tattoo because that is a sign of the Yakuza or the Japanese Mafia. But yeah, sumo wrestling is just pure fantastic and all that. And that's the way it goes and all that. I was thinking of introducing each wrestler Gyoji style as wrestler singing style, but I kind of think that I would have been a little bit too unrefined, if you will. So anyway, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Diamond. Sayonara.